Hey guys, it's Matt. Welcome to the Five Factors podcast. Hey, just before we got started, Tal and I were talking, and we're going to be talking about some grown-up adult themes. So if you happen to be in the car listening to this with your kids, you might want to pop in some headphones or wait till later on. Okay. All right. Having given you that warning. So I have this list of people in front of me, Tal, that includes names like Matt Lauer, Garrison Keillor, Harvey Weinstein, Russell Simmons, and the list goes on and on and on and on. It seems like every day there is another man in the world of entertainment, politics, Al Franken, John Conyers, who is being accused of sexual misconduct in the workplace. And so I need you to help me as a therapist who works in the world of sexual addiction and sexual misconduct. I need you to help me understand what in the world is going on.
And I hope to work in the world of healthy sexuality, it's troubling, and I know there are a lot of people in offices right now that are quaking in their boots, hoping that no one accuses them and that their life doesn't similarly unravel. So this is a prevalent problem. This is not isolated. These are not isolated incidents. This is happening all the time, all over the place. So while it's easy to single those guys out as villains and devils and demons, they are us. And I think it's important to realize that look, these guys are sinners just like the rest of us. Their sin has some dire consequences, and they have a lot of victims in their wake, and we need to be compassionate towards them as well. Feel a lot of sympathy and compassion for their victims. But right now, we're living in a very broken sexual culture. We're seeing the effects of Genesis 3 on sexuality played out in front of all of us, right now. Every day we're seeing it.
So help me understand a little bit in terms of how we got here, and because we could sit here as men who have led in churches, who have degrees from seminaries and divinity schools, about how we got here biblically, theologically, but culturally. This seems like this is a kind of a moment in time that we need to pay attention to, both as church leaders as we look at the culture around us, but also inside our churches. So help me understand a little bit about how we got here culturally.
Yeah, I think really quickly, I like to take people down a stroll down the stream of pop culture. We can go back to 1957. Your number one song of the year is Elvis Presley's "I'm All Shook Up," where he said he was itching like a man on a fuzzy tree.
What does that mean?
No idea what that means. But I'm pretty sure it's not sexual. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I don't think that's sexual. But anyway, now, so that's the number one song of 1957. Now, also what happens shortly thereafter is Playboy publishes its first edition. Okay, so its first issue comes out, 1957 is when we first see that, and so then we watch the effects of that. Penthouse comes out shortly thereafter, some other magazines, but as we go down, 1967, just 10 years later, your number one song is "I Second That Emotion" by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. Okay, I know it doesn't sound like it's a guy singing that song. Trust me, it's a guy singing that song, and lyrically what the song is about is, listen, if you are just about a quick physical connection with no hope of a relationship, I'm not interested in that. However, if you are interested in a lifetime of devotion, that's a straight lyric from the song, a lifetime of devotion, a long-term committed monogamous relationship, I'll second that emotion. Men are not singing that song on the pop charts today.
No, that doesn't
no
sound
one's making
very
a cover of
recognizable.
Second That Emotion. No, right? It's completely foreign to us right now and what we're hearing. So then 2 years after that, which I find incredibly ironic, and so in the year 69, hardcore porn is legalized in the modern world for the first time. Yeah, so here we go. Sweden and Denmark, two Scandinavian countries, are the first ones to legalize hardcore porn in the modern world. Now, America has no legislative response to that. Didn't see it coming. And so what happens is hardcore porn begins to make its way to the shores of the U.S. through the briefcases of American business people, just bringing it back. And it's not against the law. There's no law about it. There's just nothing on the books about this stuff. So this stuff begins to permeate the culture. Just a few years later, do you know what the number one song is? Brick House by the Commodores.
So we're making some shifts.
Right? I mean, and hey, don't get me wrong. The song has an incredible groove. But here, lyrically, it's a complete and total objectification of women. Yeah. And culture is cool with that. No one lost their minds. No, there was no protesting in the streets about Brick House. There was none of that. And then as we go, just in 10-year jumps, you see lyrical content get darker and darker and darker. And you see, George Michael, 1987 rolls out with I Want Your Sex, a song sung to a woman by a gay man. Yeah. Don't miss the confusion of that, kids. So there's that. And then we get into the 90s and we get Katy Perry talking about I Kissed a Girl. So now we see women comfortable objectifying other women. And then you go up into the 2000s and you see Mariah Carey. Mariah Carey is singing a song about touch my body. So guy comes to the house, just come in, touch me. My only standard, my only line is, please, for the love of all that is holy, don't videotape it and post it up on the internet anywhere. Other than that, we're good. So, and then you get Britney Spears singing a song about group sex because, now, just one-on-one sex is not nearly pleasing enough anymore. So now we have to get into to far darker stuff. And so this is where sexual activity in our culture has been going. And this is where we see it. And so the lines are they're not just blurred. The lines are just gone. But, but go ahead.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking about this, and I'm thinking about, it seems like part of the challenge that we have here, because we could talk about this a lot in terms of what's happening around us and how these streams have kind of come together and collected the world that we're in. But as we've been talking about this, I think one of the things that we said that we're not hearing enough people talk about yet, and that is that inside our workplaces, particularly inside our churches, since a lot of our audience are church leaders, we're not paying attention to what's really happening underneath the surface. And that is, when you see this happen, anytime that somebody else is accused of doing these kind of things to people in the workplace, somebody's going to go, look, the reason that this is a problem is that everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Everybody agrees to that. So then why doesn't it happen? And particularly not out there, but for those of us inside the church as church leaders, why is it that we have to pay attention to this for ourselves? And why do we have to pay attention to the churches that we lead so that we actually end up with cultures that are sexually healthy? So maybe dig into this. Help me understand what keeps people from treating people with dignity and respect in relationship to sex and sexuality.
In a word, selfishness and self-centeredness. Well, it's two words, one of them hyphenated, but selfishness and self-centeredness at the end of the day. That's what it comes down to. That is the bite. That is, we are selfish creatures. Our flesh is very, very selfish. We want what we want when we want it the way that we want it. And we have a culture that lauds that praises that everything is about you, man. Just get what you want when you want it the way that you want it. And everything is sold that way. It's marketed that way. Everything is that way. And so that permeates our sexual culture as well. And we just got done, as a culture, not you and I, but, our culture just got done celebrating the life of Hugh Hefner. I was just taken aback and astonished by the number of people that attributed to Hugh Hefner terms such as dignity and respect.
Yeah.
I can think of nothing more false than that. I don't see that he treated women with dignity and respect. I don't see that. I don't see that at all. I don't see that he treated himself with dignity and respect. But sexuality in our culture is upside down. But I think it's really important that we define sexuality.
Yeah, I think you should do that.
I appreciate that encouragement. So the thing here is, I think in our culture we view sexuality, when people bring up the topic of sexuality, people get nervous. Oh no, we're going to talk about this. He's going to say this out loud, or we get really uncomfortable because at the end of the day, what we think people are talking about when we talk about sexuality is sexual preferences or sexual activity. That's not what sexuality is.
Okay.
That's what sexual activity is. Sexuality is our way of connecting with each other. Spirituality is how we connect vertically with God. That's the spiritual plane. Sexuality is how we connect on the horizontal plane. That's how we connect with others. It's what we're created to do. There is sexual energy in every relationship that you have, every relational connection that you have. Sexuality is part of who I am. And if I'm sharing myself with others, sexuality is definitely involved in that. That doesn't mean sexual activity is involved in that. You and I have had a lot of great conversations and great connections over the years. That's sexuality. Mm-hmm. There's no sexual activity in that.
Nope.
I think biblically, as you look in and you dive into Jonathan and David, I know a lot of people want to make that seem like there was some sexual connection between those two, some sexual activity because they were so close. No, there was sexuality, but there was no sexual activity there. And so healthy sexuality is a major part of who we are, and it's a major part of relationship, and it's a foundation in relationship. And that's why you and I have relational health as one of the 5 factors. It's critical that we have a healthy sexual approach to that.
But it gets a little bit more personal, right? And I think this is where we do bring in kind of a biblical theological understanding that while we might look at what somebody else does and could say that's wrong in real ways, none of us are immune to that, right? I mean, like personally, internally, like we all have to wrestle with the fact that when it comes to sexuality, we get this wrong. Like we mess up. There's a very real brokenness that exists in each of us. And it doesn't come out to the level of sexual activity where we see the same level of brokenness, but internally we see that brokenness within our sexuality, right?
Yeah, I think we are, it doesn't take 5 minutes to get a survey of where we are as a culture and go, wow, culture is sexually broken, but it should take less time for us to understand that I too am sexually broken. My sexuality did not escape the consequence of Genesis 3. Mine is broken too. And I see my sexuality, my broken sexuality in broken relationship with others. I can see that, but internally, we're all broken. Nothing in us escaped the fall. Okay, we have that, but it's what are we going to do with that, and how do we surrender to that, and how does that get sanctified in us, and what are we willing to do about it? We look at the list of names that you read early on, and we see, well, yeah, that guy's sexually broken. Those people are sexually broken, but we are too. My client list is full of pastors' kids.
Yeah.
And this is what I do. And I've been to, I've consulted with a lot of churches when this stuff hits the fan and nobody knows what to do. I think one of the most startling ones I've ever been involved in was in New York. And I mean, look, this pastor could be behind, he had an office suite, not just an office, had an office suite. And I'm not against that. But this office suite had 5 solid wood lockable doors.
Wow.
My first question to everybody involved was, okay, I'm sorry, how are any of you surprised?
Yeah.
You don't get that ground. And I think for us as ministers, for those that are listening that are ministers, there is a dark twist to what we do. And the enemy can corner us so quickly in believing this lie, because our people want us to be perfect, and they will look at us as such and afford that to us. They look at us as sinless individuals a lot of the times. And a lot of us, if we get gut honest, love that they do that, and we cultivate that we do that. And that's an abuse of power. And it's not honest. And so that is broken sexuality, and we'll exploit that into sexual activity if we're not careful.
Yeah. All right. So here's what I hear you saying. Okay. So, living in a world where everybody says, and let's assume that it's true, that they want to treat people with dignity and respect. We're talking about situations that exist in any and every church where we have to basically go, when it at the level of sexuality in our relationships with one another, they're broken. Okay. So if we were just to talk about, hey, the relational culture in your church is broken, we're just saying the sexual culture, the culture of sexuality in your church is broken. And that's because sexuality is upside down in the world within us, that we're broken internally, and we don't really know how to express our sexuality in healthy ways. And so that devolves into selfishness and self-centeredness, right? So, so how do we put Humpty Dumpty back together again, right? So how do we create a sexually healthy culture in our churches?
I think it's going to start with just realizing where we are and defining that, and that is that we live in a world where common sense has left the scene. I mean, it just has,
right?
Because we have absolutely just taken all the lines, the boundary lines, and just erased them. We didn't blur them; we just took them away.
Yeah.
And so there's a part of it that's kind of like, if you can stand back on the outside of it, it's almost laughable to watch people be shocked that something bad has happened. Well, I mean, we took all the boundary lines down. We removed them, and so then we just act shocked that something bad has happened. But we just need to recognize that. I also, and I speak in a truckload of churches on sex, porn, sexuality, all of these things, and I challenge almost every church I go into, and sometimes without the pastor's foreknowledge, with him in the room, I will say, what is this church's vision statement for the godly sexuality of your people? I bet you don't have one.
And is that because they're confused about what you're asking? Or if you were to translate it differently to make it super simple, what would you say and probably get the same response?
I think it's just they haven't thought of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I really
like
do.
even a vision for what relationships should look like.
Yeah. I mean, the vision statements are far more about growth.
Yeah.
And let's just be honest. When we talk about growth, almost every one of you believes that's numerical.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about sanctification growth, discipleship growth. What is the healthy sexuality of your people? What is your vision for them as a church, as a body? What do you want? If that vision statement is, oh, sweet Jesus, if we can get them to the altar's virgins, that's the win. You're selling everybody far too short. Beautiful, beautiful thing. It is a godly creation. I think one of my major rubs with the church is we have allowed a terminated manufacturer's rep to sell the product of sex.
Wow.
While we have stayed silent in the pulpits. We haven't talked about it because you know what? Some of my bigger donors get a little nervous if I start talking about it.
Yeah.
And they threaten to pull out, or they start to leave, or the checks get smaller. And I mean, I've told you this for years. When people call me, if a pastor calls me instead of my agent to book me to come speak, the first question out of my mouth is, okay, hey, great. I'm glad you called me. Quick question. Are you currently in or about to start a capital campaign?
That's real talk, though.
Because if the answer is yes, just get done with that and call me then, because this is not going to go down. You're going to end up canceling me about a month out. By the time you start putting out promo materials for me coming, then you're going to go, oh man, you know what? Some of my people are really uncomfortable. And so we continue to allow our terminated manufacturer's rep to sell the product. Here's the reality. The American Academy of Pediatricians said in the study, this study is over 10 years old now, that the American adolescent is exposed to 14,000 sexually explicit references every 12 months. Let me break that down. That's 40 times a day, kids.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time you have seen the youth in your church from Sunday to Sunday, they have been given 280 messages about what sex is for and how it is to be used, and none of those by God's design.
Yeah.
And you don't say anything? And how many of us have heard or attempted a sermon series on the Song of Songs?
Yeah.
We just don't do it. Like, and I'll ask that almost everywhere I go. I'm like, give me a quick show of hands. How many of you have heard a sermon series on the Song of Songs? I may get like 3 to 5 hands, and I go, okay, how many of you have heard more than one? And all those go down. We're not talking about God's design for sexuality. We're not talking about God's desire for our sexuality and our sexual activity. We're not talking about that. And that's a major, major issue because, I mean, we have to get there so that we can learn to express our sexuality in healthy ways. Because if we're not looking at the book that tells us how to do that, and we're not talking about that, and we're not teaching that, then nobody's going to know how to do it. And that's on us. We can decry culture all that we want, but it's on us as spokesmen.
So if you have a pastor who hasn't been talking about this much in his church, would you encourage him to focus on just the language of relationships in order to, start with a healthy sexuality? I mean, you could talk about sexuality, but that seems to maybe get it makes them nervous. Maybe more nervous than talking about relational health. Or would you say, look, the world around us is talking about this. We need to kind of take this back a little bit, and we need to not be afraid of using language like sex, sexuality, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think. I mean, we've all seen the pastors try and get out there with the provocative billboard. We've all seen the news stories of, oh wow, a church is going to talk about sex, and I mean, it's laughable and sad. But I think we still have to do it. I don't think we need to promote to everybody as a growth strategy. Hey, we're going to talk about sex.
Right. I'm pretty sure that the world around us really doesn't want to know what we have to say.
And I also am heavily against any pastor standing up in their pulpit and giving their married couples a sexual challenge of here's how many times y'all need to be doing it this week.
So I mean, I know how silly that sounds, but from your perspective as a therapist, why is that unwise?
Well, because that relationship may not be healthy. That relationship, that one of those spouses may not have earned the relational right to be there. There may be cheating involved. There may be sexual addiction involved. There may be sexual, predation involved. There may be a lot of these things involved, or there may just be abuse. There may just be neglect. There may just be anger. Having sex with your spouse is not going to fix any of that. The deal is, let's do the heavy lifting of our relationship. The fact of the matter is, one of the major reasons why a bunch of people go to porn is there's no investment, there's no vulnerability, and there's no risk of rejection. I don't have to try and seduce the internet. I don't have to try and woo the internet. It's there for me anytime that I want it, and so there's no risk involved, and it's really an act of cowardice in a lot of ways. And I don't say that in a condemning way. Look, I've been there. I went to rehab for this. Okay, so I understand. I'm not just saying this as somebody pointing at those offenders. I am that offender, so I get it. But we have to be very, very careful about how we approach these things. And we're not talking about healthy sexuality. We're not teaching that. And so we're expecting our people to live in a way that we're not teaching them to live. If I ask the people in my church, hey, you know what's awesome? I think everybody ought to be doing, everybody ought to be flying a plane. Yeah. But if I'm not giving them flying lessons, then I cannot expect them to be great pilots. Yeah. So we have to be very, very careful with that. We have to be very, very careful with that.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things that we've kind of we've gone down this road, and we're talking less about a church and a pastor who's listening to this, who is actually guilty of some of these same things that we're seeing in the world around us. If that's you, pal, confess and resign. Okay, you won't, because it's not the first time you've thought about doing that or realized that you're wrong, but that's what you need to do. Okay, so to everybody else, what we're saying is, if you don't have those type of fireable, resignable offenses going on in your church, you still have a sexually broken culture in your church. Yeah. And you're part of that, right? So, Tal, what I hear you saying is, if we're going to begin to rebuild this, number one is we have to understand that the root of the problem is not sexual activity, it's sexuality. It's our relationships. And we have to begin positively, intentionally reimagining what our relationships look like. So one question for me is it as simple in mapping this out as what the scriptures lay out in terms of, hey, it is fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters. So men, she's either a mother or a sister, unless she's your wife.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, well, I'll say yes and no. Okay. I think craniologically, we'll all agree to that. Cardiologically, it's a different thing.
Yeah.
And so what I would just a couple of really quick, easy things that I think everybody ought to do, regardless of whether you believe your organization or church is struggling with this or not. I think you need to start with prayer. I think you need to go there and ask that God would bring about healthy sexuality for you and for those that you lead. And also, this is a gutsy prayer, but I challenge you to pray it, that God would break your heart over the broken sexuality of our world. Mm-hmm. It's easy to demonize these men who have, been accused and found out and exposed, and it's really easy to do that. But can you find compassion for them? Can you find a place in your heart for them? What if, because this is the modern day. This is this week's version of the woman at the well, or this week's version of the woman caught in adultery and just thrown out in front of Jesus. What are you going to do with her?
And that's different, right, than just coming in and going, I'm sexually broken too. I mean, that's more sympathy, and it isn't empathy. And so in this case, distinguish that, because I am seeing this by certain pastors, church leaders be like, I'm a sexual sinner as well. And I'm not sure if that's what you're saying. I think what I hear you saying is everybody else is calling these men dirtbags. And while we hold to an idea of right and wrong, you're imagining us responding in a different way.
Yeah, I'm imagining us responding, going, "Hey, yeah." It's like Jack Miller used to say, yeah, you're really bad, but you're far worse than you really think.
Yeah.
But so am I. I'm far worse than I think. But the deal is that the grace of God is deeper than that, and more loving and more beautiful than that, and can cover that and can conquer that. That's all a very important and valid message that we need to be sending. But we also need to be, in terms of the people that we're leading, understand that the sexual activity is only a symptom, what's going on. If you see, I don't know if it's happened in your church, but it's happened in a whole bunch of churches where there's sexual activity going down on staff, between staff members and parishioners, just whatever. But that's just a symptom. It's the sexuality that is broken. It is the relational health that is broken. This is a person that is having grave trouble having healthy relationships, doesn't know how to do it, and more than likely hasn't been taught, and more than likely has gone through a great deal of trauma and abuse that has stunted their relational and emotional health. And so they need help. It's a whole lot easier to demonize them. But these are broken, hurting people, deserving of compassion and help. And so we need to look at that. And I would also really strongly encourage you. And it's a whole lot easier in church. If you're leading a church, it's a whole lot easier. Bring everybody in and open a conversation about it. Have a staff conversation with everybody about, hey, let's just talk about sexual harassment in the workplace. Let's talk about that. Does everybody feel safe here? And I mean, just bring it out in the open. Say, look, no repercussions if you don't feel safe. I'm telling you, we're here. We want to work through this. But come in and just call it out and clearly define the expectations and policies that you have as an organization or a group in terms of what is healthy sexuality around here. What does that look like? What is not acceptable? Really clearly define that and restate that. We'll hear all the time about the importance of restating your mission. Restate the mission, restate the mission, restate the mission. Hey, you know what? Restate your expectations too.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here thinking about what you kind of said. I'm imagining, and we have women on our staff, and I'm imagining if we were to ask the question, "Is this a safe place?" And we've had conversations like that, but I think everything that I know says that if you don't get a response back, everybody kind of stares at you. It doesn't mean that you don't continue the process, and at the very least, come back and clarify expectations. Because I can imagine things not feeling safe for somebody. Yeah. And them not just raising a hand and saying, yeah, I'm nervous or uncomfortable coming into work every day. But as we clarify expectations and we continue to have those conversations, not just once, twice, but consistently, as those things come up, then that will hopefully be able to turn the corner to create a genuine environment of safety in our churches, whether it's as workplaces or just places where volunteers are showing up on occasion to help out.
Yeah, I think for those of us who've been in corporate land, I mean, we've all sat through the monotonous and painfully mind-numbing, HR seminars on sexual harassment, or we've had to watch a number of video webinars on sexual harassment, and no one looks forward to those. And they're all horribly done, which is part of the reason, but I'll give you that. But, corporate America is out there trying to address these things. And to our listener in Poland, maybe corporate Poland is doing the same thing. But, here, the deal is that even though it's there, it doesn't mean it's happening. And people are observing. Clearly they're not. We're seeing charges come out every day. But, as the people of God, what if we led in this area?
Yeah.
What if we were the leaders in this? And what if people, working on church staffs or, were very involved in their churches started talking about what they were learning about sex and sexuality in their church and what it's designed to be and how great it can be. And what healthy relationships look like with opposite sex and the same sex. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? And to have a vision statement and pursue that with passion, I think is critical. And I just don't really see anybody doing that. And it's easy to sit here and throw rocks at everybody doing it wrong, but we're doing it just as wrong. We're just not getting caught nearly as often.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I mean, geez, I feel like we're just scratching the surface on this. And guys, I mean, there are going to be more episodes coming talking about this because, again, it does come back to the factor of relational health in our life as leaders. And so we're going to be talking about this as time goes on. I would say two things kind of as we walk out of here. First off, the takeaway for me is that as we think about the kind of the secret, the one thing that we want to take away from this is the secret to creating a sexually healthy culture in your church is to have healthy sexuality and is to cultivate healthy relationships in your church. And it might not deal with a crisis that you're facing right now, but if you are just wanting to crisis proof in this part of your church, then it's the development of a healthy sexuality and healthy relationships. And so this might be an episode where you're going back, you're listening, maybe you're taking some notes as we were kind of rolling through this. You're sharing this with other leadership within your church and going, hey, why don't we sit down and talk about this? I'll say this too, to play a little good cop, bad cop. Earlier on, I said that if you are guilty of misusing people sexually, you are guilty of creating a sexually unhealthy culture in your church. And I said, look, you need to confess and resign. Okay. If you're struggling, you're like, I don't think I'm ready to do that. I'm freaking out. I'm confused. I'm worried. If you'll go to the show notes, there's simply a link there that says ask a question. And if you'll go to that, then that question will go to Tal as a therapist and just begin a conversation to where he can help you think through what is the next right step for you. And because that's what we're here to do. Wherever you are on the spectrum of this, nobody is free, nobody is guilt-free when it comes to our sex and sexuality, but we want to help you take good, healthy next steps. And so have the conversation with your team if you're a team leader. Bring this up within your team. If you're not the lead pastor, if you're not the supervisor, if you're not the team leader here, be willing to have those conversations. And for some of you, if this is an uncomfortable thing, then I think praying for courage and finding avenues that I think are beginning to open up in the world around us to have these conversations to where you feel like you're not alone. Tal, any kind of last words on this episode?
I think it's just always important to end on the simple fact that if this is you or, every one of us has a great deal of sin in our lives. And I just want to remind everybody, there's no point scale for sin anywhere in Scripture.
Yep.
Okay. There's not one. So you're not worse if this is an issue for you than anybody else. Okay. The jaywalker and the gossiper are just as guilty as are you. Okay. Now, the Bible is clear. The consequences are different. Sexual sins are sins against our body, and the consequences are much longer lasting. I can do a whole episode on just my consequences alone. And they are severe and deep. However, the blood of the gospel and the blood of Jesus still covers that, still works. The grace is there for all of us. You are not alone. You are not without salvation. God's not displeased and kicking you out, and God is not walking the halls of heaven hoping you do something to give him a good day today. Okay. So there's nothing you can do to make him angry. Okay. You don't control his emotional state. Free yourself of that, but just relax. Okay. But get help. Reach out to me, reach out to Matt, reach out to somebody in your area that can help you. Okay. And I can help you find them. And depending upon, what your area of brokenness is, I'm not of the camp that, oh geez, everyone's got to resign. I'm like, let's see what's going down. So, there's a lot of help available to you, and I'm happy to help you find it. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah. So thank you for spending some time with us, really dealing with an uncomfortable subject. And again, we are here to help. The biggest takeaway, I think, for you is if you're a leader, be part of creating a healthy sexual culture in your church, in your workplace, by helping to create a culture where your relationships, where the sexuality, the relationships between people are healthy. And that's going to take you a long way there. So again, this is an episode we'd love for you to share with other people because it's a topic that I think where a lot of people are confused. We're trying to look for answers, and hopefully we've provided that for you. So we're going to come back next week with a brand new episode. Again, talking about relationships, talking about how to drama-proof your holidays, your vacation, everyday life. So some fun stuff there, and actually just get into some of the weeds about how you deal with conflict resolution. So for myself, for Tal, thank you for being part of the Five Factors community. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode.